This is bamboo. And somehow, these strips have to become one of the most recognizable battleships ever built by the United States. But there is another reason I chose USS Iowa. In November 1943, while this ship was crossing the Atlantic with President Franklin D. Roosevelt aboard, a live torpedo began running toward her. The strangest part is that the torpedo had not been fired by the enemy. It had come from an American warship. Before we find out how that happened, though, I had a problem that was much smaller in historical scale and enormous on my workbench: turning bamboo into Iowa without losing the silhouette that made this ship so unmistakable. I chose 1:200 scale. The real Iowa was more than 887 feet long, which meant my version would be about 4 feet 5 inches, or roughly 1.35 meters. Large enough to expose almost every mistake, but still small enough to fit inside my garage. I spread the plans across the workbench, marked the overall length, and started with the part that would almost disappear once everything was finished: the keel. It was only one long strip of bamboo, but if that first line was not perfectly straight, every other part of the ship would inherit the mistake. The real Iowa also began as a structure that did not yet look like a ship. Her keel was laid at the New York Navy Yard in June 1940. She was launched in August 1942 and officially entered service in February 1943. She was the lead ship of a class designed to combine two demanding qualities: the firepower expected from a major battleship and enough speed to operate with the fast forces of the U.S. Navy. In my garage, speed was not the problem. Symmetry was. I cut the first hull frames one at a time and began fitting them into the keel. By themselves, they looked simple. Together, they would determine the entire shape that followed. I checked every angle, locked the pieces in place with small clamps, and looked at the structure from above, from both sides, and directly down the bow. A difference that was almost invisible now could become an obvious distortion once the hull was painted. When I started closing the framework with thin strips of bamboo, the first serious challenge appeared. Iowa has a long, narrow bow. The bamboo had to follow that curve without cracking and without leaving visible steps between neighboring strips. Some pieces accepted the shape after being gently heated and bent. Others snapped just when they seemed ready to glue. Every time that happened, I went back to the material pile and started again. Then came the first real payoff of the build. After a lot of sanding, the structure stopped looking like a collection of strips and began showing a recognizable bow. There was still no paint, no superstructure, and no main battery. Even so, for the first time, I could look along the hull and think, there is an Iowa hiding in here now. If you enjoy watching naval history rebuilt piece by piece, subscribe. I waited until this point to ask, because the project has finally started proving that it might actually work. The real ship's long, narrow form had a purpose. Iowa measured 1,887 feet 3 inches overall and could make about 33 knots. For a battleship of that size, speed was part of her identity. Visually, however, nothing dominates the ship more than what I needed to build next: the 3 massive main gun turrets. On the real Iowa, those turrets carried 9 16-inch guns in 3 triple mounts. At my scale, an entire turret could sit between my fingers. It still needed to look heavy. I started by laminating small pieces of bamboo, shaped the armor angles, opened the positions for the barrels, and cut 3 tiny tubes to exactly the same length. The first test looked wrong. One barrel sat only slightly lower than the others, but that was enough to make the whole turret look crooked. I removed it before the adhesive fully cured, corrected the alignment, and tried again. It was frustrating, but it revealed something important about this project. The smaller the part becomes, the less room there is to hide a mistake. When the first turret was finally finished, I temporarily placed it on the still incomplete deck. It became another small payoff. Suddenly the hull had scale. Those 3 tiny guns made everything around them seem larger. Then I built the second turret, and the third. While those pieces were appearing on my workbench, the real Iowa of 1943 was beginning her own career. After commissioning and initial trials, she served in the Atlantic. That fall, she received a mission completely different from the combat role most people associate with a battleship. Franklin D. Roosevelt boarded Iowa for an Atlantic crossing connected with his journey to meet the Allied leaders. The ship even received special accommodations for the president. One of them survives as one of Iowa's unusual details, a bathtub installed specifically for Roosevelt. But the event that made that voyage even more remarkable began on November 14th. The formation was conducting exercises. After an anti-aircraft demonstration, the escorting destroyers began simulated torpedo attacks using Iowa as their target. Aboard USS William D. Porter, the exercise was supposed to remain exactly that, a simulation. The torpedoes were not supposed to leave the tubes. One of them did. A primer charge that should have been removed had remained in the mechanism. The torpedo left the launcher and entered the Atlantic. The ship being used as the simulated target was now actually in front of it, and USS Iowa was carrying not only her crew, but the President of the United States and senior American leadership in the middle of World War II. Back on my bench, I had reached a section that could also ruin the appearance of the entire project, if I got it wrong. The superstructure. From a distance, it seems simple. Up close, it becomes layers of platforms, fire control directors, masts, 5-inch guns, and smaller equipment. I built each level separately so I could control the symmetry. The larger shapes remained bamboo. For railings, thin mast components, and a few details that were beyond the practical limit of the material, I used fine metal wire. The goal was never to pretend every atom of the model was wood. The goal was to preserve bamboo as the main material without sacrificing believable scale. Meanwhile, in the Atlantic, William D. Porter had to warn Iowa. The formation was operating under radio silence. The first attempt used a signal lamp, but an emergency for which there was no simple message created confusion. The torpedo kept running. Finally, the destroyer's commanding officer broke radio silence and transmitted the warning. Now Iowa knew this was no longer an exercise. The battleship's crew reacted, and Iowa maneuvered away from the danger. The attack that was never supposed to exist ended without the torpedo striking the ship. It sounds like a scene written for a movie, but the core of the story is documented by the U.S. Navy. An American destroyer accidentally launched a live torpedo toward the battleship carrying Franklin Roosevelt. Over the years, even more dramatic details were added to retellings of the incident. We do not need them. What is documented is extraordinary enough. If you were building this model with me, which part would test your patience more? Aligning all 9 main gun barrels, or building the superstructure one tiny platform at a time? Tell me in the comments, and if you know someone who enjoys naval history, share this story with them, because moments like this can easily disappear behind the larger events of the war. Once the main structure was finally assembled, I thought the difficult part was over. I was wrong. I moved a light almost parallel to the hull and found a slight asymmetry near the bow. From straight ahead, it was almost invisible. After paint, however, that flaw would create a shadow that exposed everything. So I went back to the sanding block, removed material, rebuilt a small section, and tested the line again. Then came primer. Primer is unforgiving. Raw bamboo hides small differences in color and texture. Primer turns everything into one surface and shows you exactly where something is wrong. Several areas went back to the sanding block. Others received a second thin coat. Only after that did I begin applying the historical finish. Official 1943 photographs show Iowa's deck being painted deck blue. I use that reference as part of the model's finish, combined with naval tones appropriate to the ship's early Atlantic appearance. The transformation was immediate. Until then, I was still seeing wood. With the first layers of paint, I started seeing steel. The bamboo underneath had not changed. Structurally, it was still the same material, but the color unified hundreds of small pieces and made the eye stop searching for glued seams and start reading the object as a battleship. After her Atlantic assignment, Iowa moved to the Pacific in early 1944. She participated in operations in the Marshalls and Marianas, became involved in campaigns around the Palaus and Leyte, and returned to the Western Pacific in 1945. When the war ended, Iowa was in Tokyo Bay for the formal Japanese surrender. Her story would continue far beyond that moment, through the Korean War, and eventually another life during the Cold War. My model, however, would remain in 1943. It was that young version of Iowa, near the beginning of an enormous career that I wanted to preserve on the workbench. Now only the parts that almost disappear individually were left. Railings, small anti-aircraft mounts, boats, anchors, directors, masts, and dozens of fittings that create scale. A massive main gun only looks truly massive when something delicate exists beside it. That is why the smallest pieces change the model so much. I installed the last mounts, corrected a few paint details, and checked the gun barrels one more time. Then I stepped back from the workbench. Up close, I was searching for flaws. From several feet away, I was looking only for the silhouette. The bow had to feel long. The two forward turrets had to dominate the deck. The third turret had to balance the stern. The superstructure needed to rise in layers without turning into a mass of parts. When the final detail went into place, I thought again about that torpedo in 1943. Iowa had been built to face enemy fleets, yet one of her earliest moments of danger came from a mistake inside her own escort. It is a strange reminder that even enormous military machines ultimately depend on thousands of small human decisions. Maybe that is also why building a model like this changes the way I see the original ship. After spending hours trying to align 3 tiny barrels, a historical photograph stops being just a photograph. You begin noticing how many structures, systems, and people were hidden inside that silhouette. Then I cleared the tools away. What had started as pale strips of bamboo now stretched more than 4 feet across my garage. The complete shape of USS Iowa was finally there. The long bow, 3 main turrets, superstructure, masts, dark blue deck, and all the tiny details that seemed impossible when they were only marks on a plan. On one side of the workbench, I left a few pieces of untouched bamboo. On the other side was something that looked like steel. That was the transformation I wanted to see from the very first cut. If this Iowa made you look at the ship a little differently, subscribe and follow the next build. And now you get to choose the next challenge. Which ship should come to life in this garage after USS Iowa? Leave the name in the comments and share this video with someone who would enjoy watching another naval legend begin again with something as simple as bamboo.